All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is week two and day two of the Cocharya Awake, Aware, Arise global virtual conference. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm thrilled to be part of the Cocharya community. And I'm really excited to welcome today's panel, a fantastic panel consisting of Amrita Madiah, Shabari Madappa, and Prateep Sen. And today, we are here to talk about eldercare and a coaching mindset. A lot of us, particularly, this is true for me, in my generation at least, a lot of us, we're dealing with aging parents and other elders. And that's a current reality. And then with changing social structures, this is an ever-evolving space. So today in this discussion, we're going to explore the mindset that's required to navigate this important period in our lives. And we'll also examine the role of a caregiver and the elements of coaching that are worth reflecting as necessary tools for caring better. So leading this panel discussion is Amrita, who is the Director of Talent Development at Adobe India and a Diversity and Inclusion Champion and an Executive Coach. So she's spent more than 2 decades and she's worked in different industries and geographies. And working within large organizations as a consultant or as a consultant to large organizations, it has provided her a great window into how people and organizations can function and be successful. So this is from a little bit more about Amrita's background. I love the fact that her education has been non-linear. I can relate to that. Among other things, Amrita is a PCC certified coach through ICF and has held various roles in the learning and development space. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to Amrita.
All right. Thank you, Meenakshi, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome everybody who's joined us. Thanks for joining. I must start by saying, okay, how did we even think of this conversation around eldercare and coaching, and what was the genesis of it? I think that'll be fair. So I left home 20 years ago. Ever since, of course, I visited my mom often. It's been for a few hours to maybe a couple of days every now and then over all of this time. But over the last few months, little over 3 months now, and you're probably saying, what, just 3 months and you're already having this conversation? Yes, it's only been about 3 months, but I have spent practically 24 hours a day with her. It's awesome to be able to get that kind of time with my mom, which I wouldn't have otherwise had thanks to this COVID situation and everything else. So I can't complain. It's great. I have her all to myself. It also includes incredible Scrabble matches till very late in the night. And they're highly competitive, let me tell you, but I'm not going to tell you who's winning right now. But yeah, it's tough. But having said all of that, it hasn't also always been that easy. And then very often I find myself having conversations with somebody else that I know very well to say, oh, we had this conversation. This is how I reacted. Now in hindsight, I don't know why I said what I did, or I don't know why I did what I did. And if I think of, what I would have done maybe as a coach, I could have responded differently. I could have asked a question instead of having said something. And the more I thought about it, I kept thinking, I'm not doing something right here. Something isn't okay. I'm supposed to be, like Meenakshi said, a certified coach and all this stuff that I've done, but it's just not helping me here. So that's really where this came up from, is there something as a connection between everything I know as a coach and I practice as a coach to how I could channelize that into eldercare? And are there more people out there who are struggling like me? So that's really what the genesis of this, what was the genesis of this topic. Fun fact, my mother is listening right now. So everything I say can and will be used against me in a future conversation. That I'm sure about. Having said that, let me introduce my co-panelists in this discussion. First up, Prateep Sen. I'm really excited that you're with us, Prateep, because I think there's so much expertise and experience to share. Prateep is the co-CEO of Tribeca Care. He's an engineer. He is an XLRI graduate and also studied at Columbia Business School, 25 years of experience, really varied, great organizations, and now an entrepreneur and business executive. I'm sure you've read about him, but if I actually go through his entire intro, we're going to spend a long time because Prateep's done a ton of great stuff. So I'm going to dive right in, Prateep, to ask you to tell us a little bit about how did you actually get into this field? What brought you here? Why is this important for you? Tell us more.
So thanks a lot, Amrita. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Right, and it's obviously very exciting for me, lovely for me to be on this panel. And to truth be told, I didn't know much about coaching till I spoke to all of you. So I had a few friends who were coaches. I knew what they were doing, but understanding coaching as a practice is something I never really knew about. I actually listened to some of the conversations that happened over the last few days, and I was actually blown away by your founder Ram and his vision of starting this and trying to change the world, change people through coaching. I think it's brilliant. Some of the people were very good. There was a gentleman, I forget, Michael something, who mentioned about kindness. Again, it sort of resonates as we get a little older, a little more mature, I guess, when you leave the usual, what you're supposed to do and start thinking about what you really want to do. So I think that resonated. And there's another gentleman who spoke very well, Sanjay Dutt. I really loved his concept of, I think it was called Take Two, Amrita, right? And I think, when I listen to him and when I look back at what I'm trying to do, a lot of it again makes sense, right? So what drew me to this field is essentially that, like you said, I'm an MBA engineer, worked in New York, worked in London, and in the back of my mind, there was always this, this worry saying, what's happening to my mother at home? She's one of those very independent women who live, by themselves. But she likes her own privacy. She doesn't want anyone in the house to actually do anything. But she locks the door and she's got like, I think 5 different, locks that she puts on before she gets in. So if she ever falls ill, right, you probably need to get an entire truck to actually bang through the door and right? So she's one of those people, and I was always wondering what's going to happen to her, what's happening to her. And there was a little bit of guilt also, me leading my life, doing my own stuff, mother at home. And that actually got me started thinking about, what could I really do? And everyone does their own stuff. There is usual structures that you put in place. I realized that in India, there's hardly anything happening, right? So when I went back into the US, UK, I spoke to friends out there, saw what's happening, and I realized that there are very good, assisted living facilities or independent living facilities, all of that out there, those structures. And that's when I said that, let me get back to my mom. I thought I really wanted to, but at the same time do something that that can make a change to what's happening in India, right? So I left, I left London, came back, I packed up all my bags, I got the cat into a holding cell on British Airways and brought him back. And I suddenly, moved away from being a banker into being an eldercare specialist. But when I look at my own life, right, and where I am, I not where I am, where I was, I think I was a microcosm of what's happening today, right? And that's, nuclear families, people, stretched between, work, family. Usually nowadays it's, both, husband and wife who are working. Kids have a very demanding thing. You're away from your own city. Parents are living longer, right? So suddenly what happens is that you have, kids on one side, parents on the other, lots of work in between, the stress of all of that. And this is what is in our trade called the sandwich generation. We are the sandwich generation, right? And then I thought that, why can't we do something for the sandwich generation? And, I was just thinking, right, if who was it? We Are the World, that song, right? Lionel Richie, I guess, right? Instead of, if you had to croon it again, it would be We Are the Sandwich Generation, right? It is, everyone is in that boat. So let me just, close out here, just give you a few metrics, right? So 1 in 10 people or 1 in 11 people are senior today, right? It's going to change to about 1 in 6 in about 20, 30 years time. That's the prediction, 1 in 6, right? Japan is one of the most elderly countries in the world. 28% are seniors, right? Europe is largely at about 20%, so 1 in 5, right? US is 16, so 1 in 7 are seniors. China is 12%, India is about 9%, so 1 in 10, right? The entire global economy is about, about $1 trillion. This is what they say is what Eldercare is. So it's a big space, a lot needs to happen, right? And I just thought that, can I make a difference in one little place? So that's my very, very, slightly long introduction, but that's what it is.
Wow, that is so awesome that you're actually making, it's one thing to think about doing something or to always worry about what would happen. It's really another to sort of give up everything you're already so familiar with and you were so successful with and make a complete shift to make a difference where it really counts. Wow. Thank you. Thanks, Prateep. Well, let me also introduce our other panelist with us today, Shabari Madappa. Very dear friend of mine, facilitator, OD consultant, also an executive coach. Shabari's worked in senior leadership roles across many different organizations, consults with very senior leaders and organizations at this point. And she's also partnered in running a very successful chain of restaurants, which is where I think we first met, maybe not so formally, but that's where we first met. Shabari is also from XLRI, has a multitude of certifications, and she's also from Cocharya, like me, with a PCC certification. But what's going to be very interesting right now, Shabari, is to ask you, what drew you to this conversation, other than the fact that I asked you, please join me? There must be something, so tell us more.
Thank you, Amrita, for inviting me and having me here and just listening to Prateep's introduction and yours. I'm just so excited that we're having this very special session. Who would have thought that there's a connection between the two, right? Eldercare and coaching. So, well, thank you for your generous introduction. I think for me, my introduction into coaching has been almost about 12 years ago as an executive coach. And over a period of time, well, I must admit, when I started off, I thought of it as just a profession, right? It's one of those professional certifications that I need to add on to my kitty. I've been in human resources all throughout. I was consulting, and it felt cool to be a coach. And, honestly, that's how I began my whole journey. But as it progressed, I do see coaching very differently. In fact, as an executive coach, I think there's a part, I don't think I'm doing coaching. I think the way I look at it is, am I being a coach? And so how is it, how am I integrating that in the way that I live my life? So it's a very key part of who I am. It's a key role that I play. But more recently, one of the other key roles that I play is as a caregiver. And so my parents now live with me, like I suppose many participants in this webinar and many others who will watch this. We are at that age where caregiving sometimes becomes a very large life role that we play. My father's 83, and he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's a couple of years ago. And my mother too needed help. She's diabetic, heart patient, etc. And the whole piece about caregiving and coaching, well, I saw an intuitive connection. And we will talk a lot more, I know, in this today about what are the connections and panels, etc. But I sensed an intuitive connection in the way that I'm playing these two roles in my life. But I must admit, until you spoke to me and we started exploring and talking about it, the penny sort of dropped. And I started truly enjoying reflecting on what this means and also where are they disconnected as well. So I really think of both caregiving and my being of a coach, almost like I look at them as speed bumps. So from an Indian metaphor, speed bumps are always there to slow you down. And I do think that my caregiving role has certainly helped me draw back from a certain very busy lifestyle, but to slow me down to really ask, what's the road ahead? And I think coaching does that beautifully as well. It does require us to pause and say, what's the road ahead? So that's the connection, and that's why I'm excited to have this conversation with both of you here, and with, of course, all our other participants too.
All right, lovely, thank you. I do love the, not doing, but the being piece. And I hope that's what we'll also be able to kind of hone into in this conversation today. So now that you all know, each of us and why we're here, let's talk a little bit about this session really quickly. I think the way we've thought about it is that it's a discussion. It's clearly not a discourse. We don't claim to have all of the answers, but we definitely hope to uncover some. And we also hope that this won't be, like a spectator sport, that each of you will get involved. You'll chat with each other, like some of you have already started, as much as we chat with you, right, and engage with us. So that's what we hope is going to be the way this will work. Just before we get started, Meenakshi, if you can help us with the first poll question. Let's take a quick check with all of you who are here with us today. Are you a caregiver to a parent or an elder is what we want to know. So we're going to stick a link in the chat pod, the Mentimeter link. So can you click on it? It'll take you to a different page. And if you can respond to the question there, which is, are you a caregiver to a parent or an elder? Yes or no? And if you have been even in the past, but maybe right now that's not what you're doing, say yes then as well. Yeah. And let's see what we get as responses. All right, we've got 30 people with us, and we can see which way this poll is already getting skewed. Yeah. See the danger with 30 people in the room and a poll that has 15, as we know 15 haven't voted. The good thing is we don't know which 15, so you're in luck. But yeah, it'll be great fun if you can just give us a yes, no. It just tells us more about what you could be experiencing or not. All right, great, thanks. Thanks for telling us where we are. I guess we have a significant number of people here today who potentially are caregivers or have been in the past. Let's ask another question then, Meenakshi, if we can get to the next one, which is the one word that you associate most with elder care? Whether or not you're in the middle of it right now or have been in the past. When you think of elder care, what's the word that you associate with it? And that's coming up as well in the same Menti link.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. It's the same link. So if you can click back on the same link. I'm going to put the link again.
All right, thanks. So I think Ekta's written in here, which is responsibility and love. And Ekta, if you can just click back into the Menti link, it'll sort of throw up a nice little word cloud for us. There you go. Oh, I love this. Look at the words that are coming up, and Shabari, you, Prateep, will have a chance to really reflect on some of what we're hearing here. Yeah, there's patience at the heart of it all. Those of you who are not familiar with this, the bigger the word, the more number of times it's being used. That's essentially what it means, right? It's more commonly referenced. Okay, great. Maybe there aren't more coming in here. Wonderful. So we're seeing patience, we're seeing compassion, love, in that order probably. And then of course there is also things like sympathy, forgetfulness. How sweet. I don't know whether you mean it in a sweet way or a oh my God way, but it's great that it's there because I guess that's something we see as well. Responsibility, being sensitive. Lovely. Thank you for sharing. Let's see what all of this really adds up to. Actually, this also makes me think, Prateep, what should we know about elder care before we can talk about a coaching mindset? Because if we're not in it right now, haven't been in it before, or have been, I'm guessing we have our own view based on our own experience, but I don't know if we really know everything that goes into elder care. And since you're in that field, it'll just help if you can sort of open this up and tell us what goes into it.
So that is a very tall question, but I'll try to simplify it, at least in my mind, right? So when you look at elder care, I think the fundamental is that you're taking care of someone who is over a certain age, right? And care almost makes it sound as if you're caring for that person. But then a 60 to 70-year-old person would be very different from a 70 to 80, would be very different from an 80 to 90, and so on, right? So here what we actually talk about is what we call a high touch, low touch way of actually working, in which when there is someone who's, let's say, not even 60, right? I'm going to turn 60 probably in a few years, right? But when, 65 to 70, 75, whatever it is, right? And every person is different fundamentally because, their constitution is different. They've looked after themselves in different ways. Think of what we call a junior senior, right? Someone who's more on the 65 to 70. They don't really too much. They have a little bit of anxiety. They're doing their shopping. They're doing, they're driving around. They're fine. They need very little help, right? But you still need to start helping probably in some way at home. On the other hand, someone who's about 90 years old, right, and or 95, they need a very different type of help, and therefore you have different ways of providing the help. A large part of it is what we call independent living. The person is living in their own homes, right, and there is care that's happening. It could be an outside care worker who's helping. It could be family members who's helping, and that's been the age-old way of providing. The second could be assisted living, in which someone goes into an assisted living facility. Again, there are different levels of it, right? One of them is almost like, very nice, they do everything, but then the intensity of it can increase as the person ages, right? And then there's dementia care, there's rehab care, there's a whole host of specialized care that happens. But fundamentally, it is about providing care to that person, right? But when you think about that, and I'll tell you where I'm going with this, is that caring for an elder is almost the opposite of care, how you look after kids, right? For kids, you start with an intense amount of care, a lot of care, and then over the few years, what you really do is you take away the layers of the cocoon, right? At every stage, you take it away, they go to school, and you are almost as a good parent, what you're trying to do is to introduce them to the badness of the world, right? So they start, right? So your role is to show them a series of disappointments that they go through, to which they will come when they're 18, they really know what the world is like, and then they are, able to do that, right? So what the parent has done is actually take off the scaffolding at every stage. On the elder care side, what you're really doing is to provide the scaffolding in a way, right? You provide a less amount of scaffolding, then you start increasing the scaffolding as the person needs it. Right, so I think that is one thing to sort of think about care the way at least I understand it. On the other side, I was actually going to go to that. The second tenet, I think, is that we are all carers, right? So just like you said, like the poll said, right? A good 80–90% of people said that they've cared. We are all carers. We don't really realize it, but that is a role that we'll have to take. And as we, the statistics that I mentioned, today in India, 1 in 10 is about 1 in 10 is elderly or senior, which means to say that for every one person, there are 9 people out to help them, right? In Japan, it is about 1 in 3. So for every senior person, there's only 2 people, right? And the world is slowly moving into about 1 in 5, 1 in 6, right? So our role as carers is going to increase a lot more, right? Social security is getting pulled away, which means to say that people have to, whether you talk about the UK, whether you talk about any other country in Europe, but you don't have the money to provide that care that you would have, or in the past you would have provided, right? China, single child, which means to say that suddenly fewer people who are going to take care of. So what people are saying is that there's a caregiver cliff, right? Suddenly you're not going to have caregivers, right? And who's going to care for them? It's going to be you and me. So all of us, right? And when we talk about the mindset, all of us should know that we are going to become caregivers. And the way to almost think about it is that for us, it should be a rite of passage, right? So the rite of passage that we have are usually birth, puberty, parenting, I think old age or something like that. What we should sort of insert within that should be caregiving, right? And that is a rite of passage to actually care for your parents and then watch them die one day, right? That should be sort of included in it. And in my mind, that is what being a caregiver is all about.
Wow. All right. Wow. Every time I listen to you, there's something new and different. Just even if you've said the same thing, but you're saying it today, it just
Thank you.
Feels different. Thank you. I think that rite of passage is certainly something to sort of think about, because at least in different cultures, I don't know how it translates. We do have people, I think, from different parts of the globe or different cultures right now. And the thought of something being, just the way it is, and it's just done. We don't question, to something that you think of as a rite of passage and start speaking about. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this discussion, but glad you brought that up right here. In fact, now is probably a good time as well, maybe with all you've said, Prateep, and I can see some reactions in the chat. Meenakshi, if we can get up another poll, I want to understand from the audience here, do you think a coaching mindset can actually help in elder care? And before we dive into it, is just, now that you've heard Prateep, yeah, yes, no answer, same Mentimeter Menti link. Does a coaching mindset help in elder care is the question for you. So let's see how you're thinking about it. Thanks, Bhavna. That was a great response. I didn't know it was a Buddhist way of thinking, and you're also doing some awesome work in this space. So it's fabulous that you joined us. Thank you. Yeah, and unsure is absolutely a good answer to pick up as well. That's what we're trying to do, right? To explore. Thanks. There's an uncanny 14. Either this poll doesn't take more than 15 people, or we've got 14 fast fingers. Thanks. So those that are responding overwhelmingly say, yep, we think there's a connection. Great. Thank you. While we're on this, another question then for everybody. Meenakshi, if you can bring us up the next poll. Which one word do you associate most with coaching? In this context, what's the one word you associate most? Same drill, click on the link, go back in and tell us. And you'll find that pretty word cloud come up again. Oh, look at that. Psychological safety. Wow. Compassion still stays up. Shabari, this is really interesting, right? How this word cloud is forming. And listening and compassion are almost competing for space. I love that there's learning.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so maybe let me pass this over to you, Shabari. What are your thoughts when you look at the poll? And really, how do you see coaching connected here?
Oh, I mean, I would plus on all of these words and offer another additional view as well. You know, there's this brilliant movie that I saw on Netflix recently called The Fundamentals of Caring. And I'm going to share a quote from there, which really it's really worked for me. And they say there that caregiving is not just about feeding and clothing and cleaning, but it's about navigating a very complex relationship between the person who's giving care and the person who needs it. And Amrita, what really stood out for me is that is so true for coaching as well. Because yes, we do have to listen, etc. But sometimes I wonder that we reduce coaching to just asking questions and listening, deep listening, and offering challenge, etc. But instead, if you really think of it, it's about how do you navigate this very complex relationship between you and the client? And that happens throughout the journey as you walk with that person. Yeah. The second thing, the connection that I'm seeing is that if I look at both these professions, and I love how Prateep, you said, the scaffolding, etc., and how you sort of break it down and rebuild it. And I can sort of resonate with all the various roles as a parent. And now I sometimes think I'm a parent for senior citizens in my home as well. But if I think of these two professions of caregiving and coaching, fundamentally, the reason we're drawn to this is because of a desire to help. And we know that helping and receiving help can be very problematic. It's not the easiest of relationships at all. In fact, sometimes we may, in the eagerness to help, we may actually not be very helpful. And during our coaching certification, we learn this all the time. Don't take over the problem, right? Don't try and be over helpful. And there's a connection from a caregiving perspective, and I'd like to explore how this happens in coaching as well. I read this in Edgar Schein actually talks about this in a beautiful book called Helping. He says one of the things associated with helping is a sense of loss, because you lose status. And I was thinking about that as Prateep was talking about the various stages. And I was just reflecting that as we proceed to more and more support, the person receiving care in a way is losing status, is losing control of their lives, and certainly a certain status of identity, in their own eyes as well. And I was reminded of something that happened to me in one of my coaching engagements. And so that's my connection to coaching here, is very early on, one of my coaches, I was shadowing him, as is often, I'm sure several of you have used that technique. You shadow the executive for an entire workday. And I remember sitting in this meeting room before the team came in, and he was going to have one of his team meetings. And I was aghast because he did not introduce me as his coach. But instead, he communicated it as someone from HR who is here to observe the process. And frankly, I was not just disappointed, I was very upset. But now when I think of it from a hindsight perspective, right, we always say 2020, etc. But, all of these executives, highly, achievement-oriented, successful executives that come to us for coaching, I wonder if we can also connect that when they do approach the coaching process, yes, it is to help them, but is there also a certain nagging loss that they are experiencing as well? A certain loss of status, right? It's not easy to reach out or to accept a journey along with someone else who's often a stranger. Very often as a coach, we're complete strangers to the person as well. So I think the connections I'm drawing, a couple is one, of course, is if we can just go beyond the skills. We all are trained on the skills, yeah? But can we just step beyond and look at it as, what does this relationship mean and how do I navigate this? And the second is, can we, we've talked about empathy in the word cloud, but to me, empathy would be, are we in touch with this certain loss? And what would it mean to bring that awareness into our coaching?
Oh, that's so beautifully articulated. Thank you. And I'm sitting here nodding vigorously, making notes in my head going, that's exactly what I'm doing wrong right now. And I have no idea how to fix it. So it's very beautifully put. Plus I think the roles that you spoke of as well, Shabari, we should spend some more time a little later in this conversation talking about it, because I really don't know how often we go into this journey of caregiving, having thoughtfully negotiated what the role is going to be like and what's expected, versus doing it maybe as another thing. And all of us everyone probably approaches it very differently. So I think you've set us up really well with a bunch of things we can spend more time talking about. I'm also going to ask all of you that's in the audience, as we speak, if there is something, and thank you, you're already chatting with each other, so that's fantastic. Anything that resonates here that both Prateep and Shabari are talking about, or a question that you have, do pop them in. We did plan to have time for Q&A towards the end, but if questions come up, when they come up, do let do this. And Meenakshi, if I miss something, please help me pick that up. So I'm just going to move us forward now that you've set this up so beautifully, Shabari. We set out to explore how a coaching mindset could enable better caregiving, right? That's what we said. So let's think about this a little bit more. Prateep, you've seen caregivers, children do many things right, and maybe often, sometimes, maybe not even right sometimes. What are some of the things that typically go wrong in elder care? Are there some things that you see that are worth calling out that we should, we can kind of pause and think about? Because then I also want to ask Shabari what she sees as those areas where we might want to focus a little bit more.
So the people that I've dealt with, right? So what really happens is that one thing I do believe is that people come from the right place, right? So when it is the children who are usually in the 40s, 50s, late 50s, wanting to look after their parents, their heart is in the right place. They want to figure out what to do. and they would have studied a lot about it, they would have read about it. So I'm talking to the people who have come to us, and everyone comes to that point through some means, right? It's usually what happens is that even before they decide to come, they realize they almost, so life is, okay, let me just take a step back. You spend the first 20 years, 18 years with your parents, right? And then you move out, and the next 30 years, you get really caught up in work, right? It's almost like a barbell. So on one side, you've spent a lot of time with your parents, then very little time with your parents, and then at about when you're, in your 40s and 50s, you decide that you need to start helping them. And usually it's a life event that happens. You realize that they have fallen. You realize that you suddenly go back after a year and you realize that your mom is forgetting things. It could be a whole host of things, or it could be an uncle who's passed away or had a heart attack. Some small little things, or a friend, someone has, something's happened. You use that, and then you start, there's a nagging little feeling, and you start wondering what to do. At that point, when you come to that point, is the time that for some people it happens early when the parents are in their 60s. For some people it happens when the parents are in their late 70s, right? But that does happen. Till that point, you almost live in a little bit of fool's paradise, saying that everything is fine with my parents. Oh, she's having a great time. She goes out and meets this uncle of mine, an aunt of mine, and she's the heart and soul of the locality. And then you call up your mother and you say, how are you? And she says, I'm fine, don't worry about it. And you don't check anymore, right? So you sort of live in that little world in which everything is fine till the point you realize that something has gone wrong, right? Once something goes wrong, what happens is the children actually start doing a lot of reading. Our usual project management focus comes back. People start saying, okay, let me read this, read that, and all that. And suddenly, by reading a lot, they know a lot more about taking care of parents and elder care than anyone out there, right? So they know a lot more than the mother, who poor lady, she does not know much about the internet. So now you have an authority of, who knows everything about it. And people, again, as I said, come from a right place, and they come and then say, you need to do X, Y, Z, and I figured this one out, and you could do this. And all that this poor, senior lady is thinking of, the gentleman is thinking, is that I'm not old, right? Yeah, my hair is turning a little gray, but then, look at my neighbor, she is like 1 year older, and she's looking so much older, right? So they go through, everyone, and that includes us, right? We all try to not show that little wrinkle. We don't want to sort of look at it, that little white hair. See, I've shaven off my hair. No one even knows that I have white hair, but we all try little things to stay away from being old, because that, we all have that feeling that old is bad, right? And probably it is, right? It just shows that, muscle power, everything's diminishing at that point. So you don't talk about it. It almost becomes a little taboo subject. And when it comes up, you have to have that conversation. It's one of those conversations that you have. And usually it does not go too well, because everyone is unprepared. The elderly lady does not want to have that conversation. She's resisting it with all her might. She does not want the stick that she probably needs, right? The kid wants to have that conversation because, and it just becomes a little. So again, what happens is that people come from the right place. They switch on from the good to the bad very easily, right? It's almost a switch from everything's fine to, oh my God, let's do so many things right now. A, B, C, D. Project management mode comes in, right? And the child becomes the parent at some point, right? So it takes on, again, the role reversal that you said, is almost from they move very quickly to saying that I know more. And that's, again, there's resentment and all that. So that's the situation that we see. We have a lady who comes in, and she sort of parachutes into Kolkata. For those 2 weeks that she's here, she makes hell for everyone. The mother is, unhappy. The caregivers and the attendants are unhappy. Everyone is unhappy. They're all waiting for her to go. And once she goes, there's a sigh of relief, and they go back to their own way, right? So that's an extreme, right? No, but when you talk to the lady who does this, she is absolutely invested in her mother's health and well-being, right? So she is doing the best of what she thinks she can, and she should, right? What is the right way is the question, right? And again, I'll just take another 30 seconds. when I started, I used to say advising the children what to do about the parents. Even I think 3 years back, 4 years back, even I had a little more of a, you should do A, B, C. So even I was very prescriptive in my way of thinking about it. And today, when I do the same thing, and this is what we're trying to coach the people within our, or teach the people within our organization, is that there is a different way of doing it, and that is coaxing things out so that the right things come out. And that is when you can actually take the conversation forward with the parent and then make something long-standing. Long discourse.
No, but great examples, Prateep. Again, I mean, you can see even in the chat, there's a lot of what you're saying is resonating. I think, I'm guilty of some of what you're saying. I think I've seen and heard some of it as well. What I'm also taking away from you, Prateep, is, there really isn't a perfect formula, just because each person you're dealing with, has something very different they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And so are you, right? So the whole approach is really not tailor-made and isn't perfect. There's probably no real playbook for elder care, but I think making the effort to understand what the spectrum of scenario or situations are is probably important. And I think the playbook approach somehow makes it feel like everybody sort of fits in, right? Which is not true. How are you seeing this, Shabari, as a coach? Just what are the parallels that you're seeing?
Yeah. And Amrita, if I may, I've been reading the very interesting chat pod as well. And you're right, it's wonderful that it's resonating with so many of you. I'm just going to, I'm triggered to share a little anecdote because I think my friend Priya has said something about being old versus feeling old, versus being old. So there's this little anecdote that happened a couple of years ago, and my parents were at that time living in a different city. It's in the south of India. They were living in a city called Chennai. And my father was 80 by then, and he'd been banned from driving, right? And that's what, this whole thing of control, I was thinking of that woman, Prateep, that you said descends and creates hell, but I would do the same thing when I'd go to Chennai as well. I would descend out there and all my wisdom just create hell about what has to be done and what shouldn't be done, right? So I land at home and I don't see the car and I don't see my dad. And so I asked my mother, so what's happened? Where is he? And she says, he's driving. He's taking the car to the hospital. And of course, there's a volcano erupting out here and saying, but how did you let him? She says, no. Those two ladies who lived around the corner are neighbors. So they live in this colony where the average age is about 60. And so there's this 85-year-old auntie in the corner who's living alone and an 89-year-old who were not feeling too well. So they reached out to this gentleman who could drive and asked him to take them to the hospital. So I reach the hospital and I'm fuming and I'm anxious, etc. And the doctor is someone who knows all of us very well. He's worked with everybody. He takes care of them. So before I can say anything and storm into the room, he looks at me and chuckles and he says, this young man out here brought these ladies just in the nick of time. And I'm wondering now, who is this young man around? But it reminded me about how, we say age is just a number, but actually to me, the more powerful thing was that when I saw my dad, I only saw his incapacity. I only saw his frailty, what he couldn't do. But interesting that the people around him were only looking at it in terms of his capability. So some of I think in coaching, this happens as well. I see that sometimes when we're doing 360 degrees feedback and we're collecting responses, people are always very explicit with what needs to change. And of course, we talk about strengths and we should be more strengths focused, but let's face it, I mean, when we go out reaching for stakeholder feedback, I get tons of stakeholder feedback of what this person is not doing well enough. And I wonder sometimes as coaches, do we fall into that trap? So can we look at our client also in terms of what is available and not just in terms of what they are incapable of doing or what they need to show up more? And so that's the sort of reflection that's there, that's coming out for me in terms of coaching. And there's one more, if I can share a personal, in coaching, we say this very often, which is focus on the process and let go of the outcome. Now, easier said than done, but I think we'll spend our entire coaching journey talking about how we should be masters of the process and not worry about the outcome. But this is an anecdote again from my role as a caregiver. So some years ago, I was consumed by this need to find the best specialist for my dad, right? There was this feeling of we will beat this. And so we would go to the experts and I'd run around trying to find an appointment. They'd give it 30 days later, drive for 2 hours to catch this person's wisdom for 15 minutes, etc. And it wasn't working. We were walking out of the room dejected. I sensed that my father was not enjoying this whole process. And then a friend said something to me which was very profound. And he said, Shabari, there's a difference between healing and caring. And to me, it helped me shift hugely and saying, what am I really doing? It helped me actually then say, I'm going to shift. And in coaching, we like to ask the and question. So I asked myself the and question. I said, how can I find a physician who is good for the ailment and good for my dad? And the answer is completely different. So have I let go of the outcome and coping with the process? Certainly not. But at moments when I find myself falling into that trap, I think some of these really help me sort of step back and say, okay, what's the question to ask now? so.
Oh, lovely examples, Shabari, fabulous examples. I think it's also sort of really adding up for everyone in the audience, and a lot of questions that have come up as well. There's some about, how do you deal with being refused the offer of help or support, right? That we're talking about. How do you make people feel, make the other person feel comfortable to accept the care that you're offering them? Someone's also asked about how do I have a care conversation? And what's coming up more and more to me is there is clearly something here about the roles that we need to play. And Prateep, you brought it up much earlier, right? There is a role reversal that's happening. Anything you can talk about therefore, Shabari, around just what is this, as when you're hardwired to think as a coach, it's very different, right? And then you have to think of yourself as a caregiver. Just any thoughts around what that role reversal looks like that we should probably pause and think a little bit more about as we go into this, now that we've opened it up so much?
So, I think there is a contextual element as well, which is in a caregiving role, I don't think a parent ever sees you as anything but a child. And so for the longest, however long your journey is as a caregiver, they are still the more experienced, wiser people in the room. Whereas as a coach, at least the way that we currently look at coaching traditionally, I know people are talking about newer forms of coaching, but today, coaching invariably, the role reversal is really that you are usually more experienced than your client. And I think that sort of enables you in a way to establish that relationship. Whereas I think in a caregiving role, we probably are starting from a minus position. Psychologically, and I saw someone else as well share that, saying what frustrated the person was how long his or her parent took to accept help. And so I think that role reversal is really, really difficult. And I'm wondering, Amrita, which, we always say walk with the client. And I wonder what would it take for us to carve out a caregiving relationship from an adult perspective? But I throw the question back to Prateep, because I know there are times when you have to sort of take control and be the parent. Yeah, so Prateep, any thoughts on?
Yeah, so this role reversal is an interesting one, right? So again, it's sort of, since we're talking about anecdotes, it takes me back to the time when, my daughter was, I think, 5 years old, 6 years old, right? And we were in London and there was a play going on in which even the parents were participating, right? So this was one in which the child was the parent and the parent was the child, right? And everyone was in peals of laughter, right? The little kid was bossing over the parent, and the kids were laughing, the parents were laughing, they were looking at each other, and it was good fun. You take you fast forward it by another 40, 50 years, and that is what it becomes. Essentially, that's exactly what was fun when she was 5 was good. When 50 years later, when the parent actually becomes the child, and the little girl is now obviously a grown girl and now bossing over the child, you can see what happens. And I've seen so many of them that people are not laughing anymore. The beauty of this whole thing, the beauty of the cycle of life, is that and I think it's about perspective, right? So how do you put yourself in another person's shoes, right? What is it? I think I wrote down this quote. So hang on, right? So this is I was actually rereading To Kill a Mockingbird, right? So I love the book, I love the movie, and then I came across this graphic novel that came up again, very excellently drawn, right? And Atticus Finch out there says to his daughter, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb in his skin and then walk around, right? And that is so true out here, right? Unless you walk around in that skin. But here in life, what really happens is you walk in that skin. It so happens that, today I'm bossing around and trying to being the parent. 20 years later, it's going to be my child who will be actually taking care of me. And I will be, again, the role reversal would have happened at some point, right? So that role reversal, getting the other perspective is very important when you're making the conversation, having the conversation with your parent, right? And for them too, because don't forget, they have already gone through the passing of the parent, right? So they've already been through a little bit of, they understand what goes on, right? So they're a little more experienced, right? The younger people are a little more on the negative, right? So getting the other perspective is important. The second thing, which is equally important, is communicate. Talk. If you don't get around, don't try to push your way across, but understand the other point of view. Have an open mind, ask the question. Don't, push your idea across. Say, what is it that you would want? How can I help? There are different ways of doing it. And I think as coaches, you guys are a lot more adept at it than I am, right? But I think it's a combination of getting the other perspective and lots of questions and communicating, which helps in actually sort of sorting out and making this role reversal process.
Wow. Okay. So that's an excellent lead in, I think, as you're talking about it. This conversation seems to be shifting also towards, while we talk about the roles, some of the questions that have also come up is some kind of, we've talked about loss of control, we've talked about resistance, and the whole shift of frame of who's telling and who's seeking. So maybe I'll ask you this, Shabari, because in coaching, we also talk about managing resistance, right? Very often. And when we speak about that, the two relationships between coach and coachee and caregiver and the elder, I'm sure we can discuss and debate, similarities and differences, but they are what they are, really. Having said that, Prateep, you spoke about this many times before, right? Sometimes it's not about resistance towards the caregiver, but sometimes to growing old or acknowledging the need for help, or even that whole diminishing capability. And like one of you said earlier, it's not about, being old versus feeling old. So if we keep all of this in mind, Shabari, we talk in coaching about help versus support. What do you think we can draw from there? Because we've used the word help many times in this conversation. And is there some shift there that's necessary?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And, it just feels like synonyms, but they aren't. Because I think when we, in coaching, for example, we don't ask the question, how can I help you? There's a reason why we say, how can I support you in this? Because it is that person's journey. But the word support has so much more of an empowering, an ecosystem around this. It is also leaving the choice to the person to accept or not. But I think, Amrita, you said this once to me, which I thought was just so powerful. We're saying that we associate help with helplessness. And that's the problematic relationship between the person offering help and receiving help, is that if we approach it from I'm helping you, it sets in a power dynamics which we do not want in coaching. Whereas when we're looking at it as in support, it's really about I'm walking along with you and I'm there. I'm in your corner. Yeah, if you wish. So that's the connection that I see between those two very, very powerful words. And I know we've been using it interchangeably today.
Yeah.
But that's the language. And I think your question is also provoking me to think about what's the approach behind that word as well.
Yeah. Actually, Prateep, you've seen this in action, right? You've seen caregivers offer help and support. And I think there were some really good questions where I think Dharmesh asked this: how do you make someone feel comfortable in receiving care? As well as I think Silvana had asked earlier about, being refused care, being refused the the opportunity to offer help, possibly being a woman. There may be some of these dynamics. What is your suggestion? I mean, how does one actually do this, given that we've said help is probably not the right approach?
So I absolutely, totally unequivocally agree with Shabari on the support versus help, right? I think along with that, what you slap on is where your heart is, right? So long as your parent or, if it's for an elder aunt, whoever it is, they understand that you're coming at it from the right sentiment, right? And I think the words that were used in one of those graphic stuff, compassion and love came out quite a bit, right? So if you start with that position saying that I'm doing it because I love you, I'm doing it because it's not because I want to do it, it's because I really love you. I want to see you to have the dignity, the life that you deserve, even at 70, even at 80, and so on, right? So if that sentiment comes out, and along with that comes out the fact that I just want to support you, you choose what you want. I'm there to give you the options. I'm here to give you the opportunity to figure out what it is, right? If that is very clear that the person still can decide. Now, what really happens is that once a person gets older, like my mom, who's now 82, she was still fine till a few years back. She had a stroke, and then I think she's getting a lot more forgetful, right? At that point, right, if that initial few years in which the relationship that you've built is strong, that they know that you're there to help you, they know that, provide support, and the other one is that they know that it is love that you're coming. When things go bad and they realize at some point the elderly figure out that they need the help, right? Initially, there is that little bit of struggle, there's a little bit of, pushing it off. But at some point, and that some point happens, and I've seen it happening all the time, it happens with an event, right? It happens when, the elderly person's brother or a friend has had a heart attack. It happens when someone in the family dies. It happens when they've had a fall. They go out to do the bazaar and they had a little fall, right? So once that happens, they know that they need that help, right? So that the cloak of saying, I'm fine, I may be, 68 and I'm fine, that cloak is sort of yanked out from from in front of them, and they know that they need the help. At that time, if you're there and you've already had a few years of showing that there are these small little helps, or supports that you're providing without really impinging on their daily lives, they will then grab you at that time, and you will just fill the void that they need, right? So that will automatically happen. First few years of that, an event happens, and then you fill in the void, and you have to continue in the same thing that's saying that. And now, as I keep saying, you're increasing the scaffolding, little by little, you're taking it up, right? And at some point, they will get fairly dependent upon you. That is what life is, right? So you'll be making a lot more decisions, banking decisions, what's going to do, which doctor, all of those you will be taking. But you have to build up to that. Now, on the resistance side, there is also, at least in India, right? And I know there are a lot of people from other countries. At least the part of India that I am in, there is a word called Abhiman. I don't know how many, and in Hindi, they would say Abhiman, right? Or Abhiman has a different meaning in Hindi as again in Bengali, which is my tongue, in which that it's almost a little bit of saying that I don't really need the help. there's a little bit of sadness when you say that you're leading a big, important life, big life, you're in Delhi, you're in somewhere else, I can take care of myself, right? And that little thing is fairly strong in the elderly, saying that, you're doing a good job, you keep on doing your good stuff, I don't need that help, right? And at some point you will see that as resistance, but you should also, again, in this case, get into that person's shoes and say, why is she saying that? Why is he saying that, right? Does he really mean it? Or is he coming from a position of vulnerability and he does not want to show that vulnerability, right? And that is where you need to understand it and not get in the face, but almost work around it, talk to them. And one of my mantras has always been, talk to your parents every day, right? Keep on talking to them once a day, make it a habit, 5 minutes, talk to them, right? If you have people visiting them, talk to them. You get a understanding, and suddenly that huge chasm that you build because you're not in the same city, or you've been, same city, but with your parents, with your kids and family and all of that, you break the chasm down and you start being part of their lives, right? And through this process, I think it is easier to then start making a change where you think you could possibly help.
Wow.
Amrita, I'm just reflecting on how tiresome this process may be, and how long before the person can understand, before the elder person can understand the reason why you're offering that support. I was just reflecting of how, Prateep, you shared about how we grow, bring up children, etc. And I'm just reflecting our whole context. We have such a reverence for independence. We live our lives fostering a certain independence in our child. As they grow older, we take pride in it. And adulthood is all about independence. And then I'm just wondering, you talked about the cliff, but we don't give that the same amount of time for the person to walk their journey towards dependence. And we somehow, and this is the penny dropping for me right now, about how I just expect that, you talked about an event, Prateep, and invariably that event can be the one reason, but it doesn't mean that they've psychologically accepted dependence as well. The event is almost as, oh, it's a little blip, like that little speed bump. And it just triggered another anecdote that happened some time back. My mother had a fall a couple of years ago, and she wasn't able to move. So there was a sudden paralysis of her left side. And so I just remember this, we had her on a stretcher, and I was flying her and my father back to Bangalore. So I'm in her home, she's on the stretcher out there, and I have a friend to help me. And here's this person on the stretcher, but she's in command. Like, she's telling me, have you locked that door? Have you closed that window? Have you, make sure that that latch is there, okay? Is the gas cylinder off? Have you taken care of this? And to me, it was a little bit of a frustrating child. It's like, you know what, Mom, you're on a stretcher. Can I handle it? I'm 51, right? But the point is, my friend had a very different perspective. She told me, oh, wow, she's in control, isn't she? And now I'm just thinking about it as that that's her way of responding to saying, hey, this is my independence. So what would it take for me to also give that long rope for letting that level of independence reduce, and a gracious acceptance of dependence was what was striking for me as I heard you.
So I'll just react to that 1 second, just for a minute, which is to say that, again, for kids, it's so easy for us to say that to bring up a kid, you need to send them to school. To coach them on a sport, send them to a badminton class or a tennis class, right? Or singing lessons or whatever it is, right? So you do that so flawlessly. But when it comes to the other side, no one really, again, that goes back to my rite of passage. It is sort of something that we, sort of push under the carpet. We try to not really talk about it. And you don't really have too many people who sort of know about it, who could actually help, right? So in some countries, there are a lot more than in others, but I think fundamentally there should be almost a way to say that these are the things which are available as you are aging, and it is fine to seek help, right? I think that it's just not about telling them what's there, but it is also to give them that mantra of saying, It is fine to seek help. Is important.
So interesting to hear both of you share this, because Shabari, I'm just thinking about this whole, it's making me think about a couple of things. One is the what's my role? What do I think is my role in all of this? Either is it the conditioned role that I'm the daughter and at some point of time I will become a caregiver. And maybe in some cultures, there's also who's it? You know, is it the son? Is it the daughter? Where do the parents, who takes care of the parents, and maybe all of those things. And the other piece, which is the control thing that you spoke about, it's very interesting because I think it also challenges the caregiver's sense of identity or role in all of this. So in my mom's house now, I told her when I was first coming here, I need a day of orientation because you're going to have to tell me what is where. Because her first reaction is, you don't know anything, I'm just going to do it. And I'm going, wait, what? I thought I was here to do it, so you don't have to do this. And then we're, going at each other. And I'm thinking, I've got like 20 other things to manage. Just let me do this my way. And I think I've even said that to her sometimes, going, Ma, just let me do it my way. You go find something else to do. And I know when I've said that, that was a really bad thing to say. So the other thing that's bringing up for me is, how does one manage one's own emotions? How do you prepare emotionally for this role of caregiving? Because we learn various other things when it comes to being a coach. We're also, we talk about it being client-centered, but we never really speak too much about how do you think about yourself, right? So a couple of things in my mind are really about how do I prepare myself emotionally? And is there anything around self-care for the caregiver that's important to pause and think about, which could be maybe even the source of some of the tension and the difficulty in managing this relationship and care? So either one of you, if you have thoughts, you can go first.
That's a really tough one. And it's tough because we know we've got to, and self-care is something that we talk about as coaches as well, which is, from a coaching perspective, before a session, I'm sure you do this, Amrita, as well, and many others in the room, which is first, finding that time and space for yourself to unravel what's happening in your life and to really empty. We say that very easily, empty yourself before coming into the room, but it is a process. And I'm just wondering about that whole piece as a caregiver as well. I mean, how can you unravel and look at this role anew? Because I know that if I look at myself only as the child and the dutiful child, then I'm not doing justice to the other person as well. I mean, I've got to be able to look at them as an equal out there. And no one would like to receive care from a dutiful child. You know what I mean? It's again, demeaning. I'd like to be able to see you as being there if I need you, versus you're doing this out of a sense of duty. I'm also thinking one more at how to prepare for your role as a caregiver, and I'm thinking as a coach as well, which is to also acknowledge that you can't do it alone, that you have to create your ecosystem. And I think that's really important as a caregiver. One of my biggest pillars is my husband, in the way that he supports and he takes care of the caregiving role as well. But it's taken me ages to ask for help. But there's a larger ecosystem as well. I mean, if you have siblings, and I've heard, we've had these conversations with friends who say, I've had a tough conversation with my sister or my brother about what they take responsibility for and what I take responsibility for. But there is an ecosystem around caregiving as well. There's an ecosystem of the spouse. There's an ecosystem of the spouse's family. And and in India, they tend to be all very invested. And the parallel I draw to coaching is that there is an ecosystem when we're meeting with our client as well, that we have to reach out and seek support. It's taken me a couple of years now to accept that it's okay for me to reach out to the HR person and say, hey, you know what? My client seems to have dropped off. Can you check in and see what's happened? Are they still invested in that process? Is there something else? But earlier, I would think of it as my failing if the coachee didn't reach out to me. And how can I reach out and tell them that, he or she hasn't kept his appointments? But really, I think one preparation is self-care, but I think acknowledging the ecosystem and who else you need to reach out to and bring that in and contract out there much more proactively would be, I think, something that's coming up for me right now, Amrita. But Prateep, from you, what do you think is?
So let me just take it as two parts, right? Two questions, right? The first question is, how do you deal with it emotionally? The second one is, how do you then take care of yourself, right? So on the emotional front, it's what you read when you were a kid, which is to say that a doctor would never operate on his or her wife, right, or husband. And the reason is because if something goes wrong, you would not be able to have the right mentality to do the right, whatever needs, right? The right decision-making ability would really. And I think as a caregiver, that is always, it's a very similar, right? The doctor example is very stark, but here you again have the same problem in which you are overly invested, unlike in coaching where you have a contract, but it could be a time-bound contract. You're not really, you don't feel for that person as much. I'm sure that you do, but it is not as strong as now taking care of someone who you love and worship or respect, right? So once you have that, how do you then sort of, pull yourself apart, right? And look at yourself almost like, look at your actions and then see, am I doing the right thing? So how do you question yourself? Almost using the more Zen way of pulling yourself out from your own self and observing yourself as you're dealing with something, right? So I think that way of being able to pull yourself in, one is the child side of you, or the, when I say child, I don't mean adult child, but I mean to say the relative of the person who really cares about her. And on the other side, you have a person who's almost taking a very pragmatic, very, very third person view of the whole thing, right? And I think being able to separate that, and you could do that, I think you can do that better when you have people around you, right? When there are other people that you can lean on who could then say that, it may be worthwhile to do it in a different way. So you should try to, again, it comes back to the self-care, which I was going to go into, but it is, if you're not able to do that little bit of detachment yourself, it is worthwhile having people around you who are almost like your sounding blocks, who would say that you need to do this, or you need to pull away a little bit, right? The bad thing about caregiving, at least for elder caregiving, is things only go bad, right? So things are nice, but over a period of time, it goes bad, really, right? Right? Unless there is, some heart attack on the way or something like that, right? In that scenario, you have to make the best of this whole thing. So I think going back to self-care, it is also about training yourself to have a good time. So caring sounds terrible, right? There is this huge, responsibility on my shoulder, and I have to do ABC and manage this. At the same time, you have to have fun, right? Again, go back to my barbell concept, right? You spend a lot of time as kids with your parents. You'll spend a lot of time interacting with your parents in their last days, right? Make that a pleasurable experience. And I think it's the narrative you tell yourself, saying that, I wonder how mom is, and I hope that things are well, right? As against saying that, I wonder what she had for breakfast, and, did she have a favorite? I don't know, whatever it is. So it is the way you approach it, where it is having fun, which is a little more important, than just thinking about the care side of it, right? So being able to enjoy that company at that point, I think that's very important. And that is your mental well-being that will happen just by having the right narrative in your mind, right? The second, few other things, right? And I think the second one would be having friends and family and professionals who could actually help out in a lot of things. Take caregiver nights off, take caregiver holidays. So actually, just like date nights, say that this Friday, I'm just going to let someone else manage my mom at home or whatever it is, and I'm going to have, go out and have a drink, right? It is important to take that time out and not only think about it. So there are these few other ways, and I think it's these fundamentally the same things that you would do in any other part of life, but understand that caregiving is a long-term game, right? It starts when they're about 65 and it will go on. And the luckier you are, the more it's going to carry on, right? Right? So you should want caregiving to be a long, pleasant ride, right? And I think once you sort of sign yourself up for that long, pleasant ride, things will work out. If you make it into a chore, it'll always be a chore. So that's my 2 bits about self-care. And I think self-care is absolutely important, because if you're not in the thing, you can just drive everyone else mad, right? It's going to impact your own family life. It could impact your, the lives of parents, of caregivers. You'll have caregivers who will walk away in a huff because you've been too taxing on them. So it's just best to compose yourself, think about it, detach yourself, look at it, and then say, am I doing the best I can? You don't have to be the best, but am I good enough? And I think that's, once you sort of settle for good enough in this, you'll do a great job.
And I should have spoken to you 3 months ago. This is great advice. It's true. So my husband and I'm now in the same city as him, but in 2 different parts of the city. And this date night business, I have to tell you, we've tried many times. Most of the time, I'm like, so exhausted. Can't like really enjoy the fact that I'm away and I'm still stuck with what's going on over here. I think it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. And I'm just feeling very buoyed by the idea of giving yourself those breaks so you come back, rejuvenated. I'm not sure how much of a connection it is to coaching per se, but I also think the emotional connection and the ability to make those detachments is worthwhile as a correlation between the two. The other thing that is also standing out for me in all of this is in coaching, we most definitely talk about co-creating the relationship, right? It's an ICF competency about co-creating a relationship with, in this case, your parents or elders or people that you're related to. I don't know how that translates across cultures, but I have a feeling that it's important that we're actually establishing some kind of an agreement and what this relationship is all about. Any thoughts, Shabari, how this could work out?
So in coaching, it is that much more easier because we enter that relationship with that frame, to co-create it, contract it out, not just with that client, but other stakeholders. And I'm seeing in the chat pod, lots of people connecting with the fact that it is a larger ecosystem out there and having a systemic view. I'm reflecting also that in coaching, it's so much more easier to contract that out because we know that we're coming in temporarily. And our intention is to actually detach at a point when we believe both the client and the coach believes that, you know what, thank you. And I'm on my journey on my own from now on. And I'm reflecting on what Prateep said, which I don't know how we contract that out. So I'm eager to hear from you because it sounds like you've said, alerting us that the level of dependence is only going to increase. And I don't know, can you actually say goodbye to a caregiving role anytime? I mean, before the ultimate, we've got to all face the ultimate demise and death, etc. But is there a way that you can contract a caregiving role? I'm not so sure. But thoughts from you, Prateep?
I think you can't. Can you exit a caring role for your own, parents or whoever? I don't think so. Not at all. Right? What you can do is give up some part of it to a professional or someone like that, but the ultimate responsibility is still yours. Right? So you own it. Someone else may do the little, the actual taking someone to the bathroom, getting the medicines, all of those things, but you own that relationship. And I think it is important to do that. If you have siblings, it helps, right? Because once you have siblings, and I've seen lots of siblings, they sort of, there's usually one who's more attuned to it than the other, right? And they take on the role. I've seen siblings in which one sibling gives up after a while and says, I've had enough of this, now you do it, right? And then it comes back because you again have, let's be very there are difficult parents. There is, and it's not that they're difficult, it's just that they're in a state of life in which things are not, they're forgetting things, we don't understand that, there could be, a whole host of things in which that relationship may get bad. But at some point you yet can't give it up, right? What you do, I guess, is once the person passes, right, you transition on to become a caree yourself, right? So in 20 years' time, you become a caree, if that's a word, from a carer, right? And you take the wealth of knowledge that you have and you become that, and you try to do it as gracefully as you can, right? So with a guy like me, and I've seen a lot of, what's happening to a lot of families, I know all the issues that happen out there. So when I am, let's say, 75 and 80, do I want to be a cankertaceous old man throwing cups of coffee at people? I don't know. I hope I don't, right? If I have my faculties in place, I like to be as helpful to people as I can, right? So those are things I think we take away from your role, but a lot of things you can't really manage, right? So I think take it on. Don't make it the central point of your life. It is an important part of your life, but remember, it goes alongside you being a father or a daughter, a mother, or working in whatever industry that you are in, and doing the best you can on the caring side and taking all the help that you can, right? From friends, family, siblings, whosoever it is. But you can't really relinquish and say, okay, now the crown is off and, you're on your own, mom. I don't think that's possible.
That's, also bringing up something else, Prateep, as you speak, is I don't know whether we have that muscle to set boundaries. And I think that's something that Bhavna has just written as well, right? It's about articulating your boundaries and your needs and having that ability to express, this is how I'm feeling. And sometime earlier, somebody here had also said, I really struggle to have a care conversation and I'm not able to do it. I know it's going to come up again. And I think there's some connection there with being able to establish the relationship and almost re-establish that relationship versus the original parent-child to what I can do and what I need. Personally, I know I'm finding that, a fairly hard conversation, and it has nothing to do with my mom as much as me and my own struggle with what do I think I need to do and how far should I actually draw boundaries? Like, should I not be giving more than I'm asking for? It's a very tough one, right? And I do think that that's possibly one of the bigger challenges while we think of co-creating is, do we have that kind of an open relationship to even have that conversation? Maybe with some parents, there hasn't been a history of such a dialogue in the past, and you almost move in more naturally. So that's the reason I also think it's worth pausing to think about this agreement that we're bringing up and the boundaries we slowly start to set. I forget who that was who asked, I need some coaching on a care conversation. If you can come back into the chat now and share a little bit more, I'm sure we should be able to talk that through. In fact, we sort of thought about a bunch of things we could share, and I think we've pretty much gone through most of the things we thought would be valuable and useful. So if there are more questions or other thoughts, do bring them up. We can talk about it. We have about 9 minutes to go. And I'm glad you also talked about the exit, Prateep, because you're right. I mean, there's no exit, but there could be sometimes a situation where you feel like, I can't do it anymore. I just don't have it in me. Maybe I started off on the wrong foot as a caregiver and I've just run out of gas, right? It's like in a coaching relationship, you realize the chemistry is not good. There is something that's not working. There is a certain formality and you can actually end that relationship. You may feel like you failed, or you might hold somebody else responsible. That's a different thing. Any thoughts on how, or have you even seen that happen where somebody just throws up their hands and like, I'm done?
Well, this one, I think it is, and I was listening to the first conversation where Ram speaks, right? And he brings up the serenity prayer, right? And it's, right? And it's exactly that, right? You control what you can, do what you can't, I forget exactly the words, but there is only so much that you can do. And then once you sort of mesh it with what I was just saying, that am I good enough, right? You don't have to do everything right. You don't have to make the very difficult situation. You're not supposed to, right? But are you doing the best you can? Are you getting the right help? I think being good enough in a lot of cases is worth it, right? And I think that is the way that at least mentally you can sort of switch off a little bit, saying that I'm doing my best, it's still not working, and this is how it's going to be, right? So you can't really let it go fully, but at least you should make peace with yourself about what you're doing.
That's a great point. In fact, I think Dharmesh has asked a very interesting question, which is what should be the purpose of life at the elderly age and how can we navigate it? I don't know if I've understood fully what you mean by this, Dharmesh, but I'll tell you what's on my mind right now. Hey, it says this question's being answered live. Oh, is it responding to me talking? How clever. I didn't know it does that. I've often had this struggle, which is, and again, with my mom, where we, want to make her do many things. We're like, you're so intelligent, you're so bright, you're so capable. Come on, you can't not be doing this or that. So this whole pushing her to do stuff, and then frustration that she's not doing it. Like, come on, I mean, she's, wasting away intellectually. She's so good, she could do more. And I got challenged once by another friend who said, whose need is it for this to be her purpose at this time? And I was like, really, honestly, it was a slap in the face, because for us as kids, we thought so much capability. Why should she not do some of these things? And what it alerted me to was, do you have the ability to understand what she wants to do at this point versus what you think she would be better off doing? Right? So I don't know about the purpose of life, who helps define it. I do feel like we may want to spend more time trying to figure out what does the elder that you're taking care of at this point feel is their purpose. And can you just make peace with it and not try to mess with it, is the top of mind response. But Shabari, Prateep, anything you want to say?
I'm just reflecting about how, we've approached a large part of this conversation about what we need to give. And I also think that in my caregiving role, it's also about what I can learn from the other person. We say that in coaching, right? In coaching, we say that you learn from every relationship. You learn from every coachee, every client out there. There's something that you take back. It's part of your own growth. And one of the things that I've associated with aging and people who age gracefully is their amazing ability to actually be so much more focused on the present. Because after some time, I think, the whole need for doing things, and I'm reflecting on what you said as well, you can do this and do that. But I also think that the part of aging gracefully is also, it's not about the doing, right? It's just about enjoying the present moment. Maybe there's a certain philosophical way of looking at one's life, saying what's going to happen tomorrow, who knows, etc. But I'm just reflecting, apart from giving, what would it take if I was able to embrace that a lot more in my life by watching myself in my caregiving role and my parents and other elders around, saying, how can I also appreciate just being present? And wouldn't that be, that is one of the fundamental coaching competencies that we talk about as well, right? Of just staying in the moment.
I have a perspective on this, right? So once you talk about purpose in life, it can just, go anywhere, right? Do you believe in afterlife, before life, whatever it is, right? So I don't want to step in on that side. However, I think what's important for people to realize, and it's not about finding purpose, but a person at 65, right, probably has another 20, 30 years left, right? Obviously, there is longevity stuff, but people like you and me, when you look at how much our parents have lived, with modern medicine and our nutrition and all that, we'll probably live a few more years more than our parents, right? Unless there is COVID and some pancreatic cancer comes along or something like that, it'll probably live. So a person who is at 65 will probably have another 20 years, 30 years. And how do you live those lives to the best you can, right? How can you be healthy? How can you do your reading? How can you contribute? There are so many other ways to do stuff, as against saying, my time is over. Now I'm a senior citizen. There are so many things you can do. So I think fundamentally, exercise, eat well, lead the right life, knowing that you'll probably live another 20 years, 30 years, and make that count, right? I think that is important, at least to me, right? And for that, you have to think about it in a different way, right? When you're 80 or 85, would you want to climb up the stairs to your own flat and carry a bag of vegetables by yourself? Would you want to do that? If you want to do that, what changes do you need to bring in today that you can be healthy and your muscles are good enough to actually do that? And I think you work backwards a little bit. And I think whatever your purpose be, right? Whether it's to meditate every day, it's to go to a temple every day, whatever it is, right? Or to write a book, whatever your purpose is, but leave the best that you can, and your life is over. Right? So I think that is the fundamental way that I think about it, and at least that's the purpose that I'll live my life with.
Lovely. Thanks, Prateep. And if we have to take it forward in the true spirit of coaching, this is allowing the elder, in this case, make those decisions or choices for themselves, versus it being something that you have sort of defined or you're looking at within a boundary of what purpose, future, present, all of that should look like. It's beautifully summed up. I also realize we just have 1 minute, and I'm assuming we get bumped out, do we, in the 60? Oh, we don't. Okay, Zoom is kind to us. But just given that probably everybody has a bunch of other things to do, we probably should wind up. I did want to tell you that we looked at the ICF competencies around the coaching mindset, just to see, were there any connections? And actually, I feel like telling you now that this is a quiz. There are 8, but I think we can happily say 7 out of the 8 are worth thinking about, really, as we think about a coaching mindset in elder care, whichever way it works best for you. But seems like it's a tough one. Personally, I'll tell you, I started saying where I am just with 3 months in the role. I'll admit very honestly that I think it's difficult to make that switch, but it's definitely worth thinking through. And the last few days of chatting both with you, Shabari, and Prateep is making me think very hard. I'm feeling pretty crappy about the way I've conducted myself and been a caregiver. Not as good as I thought I could be, but definitely feel far more hopeful about what caregiving could be all about, and how can I feel better about myself at the end of the day in the role that I am in. Yeah, so thanks both of you. Awesome sharing, better than all the conversations we've had in the run up to today. So thank you both. Thank you, Meenakshi, for helping us, and thanks everybody who joined us. Have a great evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Yeah.
Lovely.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Amrita.
everyone.
And thank you, Coach Arya, for this. Thanks, Prateep. Absolutely wonderful sharing this space with you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Does the chat get saved?